I apologize beforehand if you can hear my fan in the background. It's 1,000,000 degrees in New York. If I don't have the fan on, I will melt right before your eyes. If it's too loud, let me know in the comments, and I'll try and do a little reread of this chapter once it cools down. It's pretty hot. So yeah, here we go. Chapter 7. For a moment, Sandry thought she would cry. The wool that she started to card after lunch was now a snarled mess. The process was simple. She'd done it as recently as a year ago. Lay a clump of fleece on each card, then drag the teeth on one card through the wool on the other. The metal teeth groomed the clumps into fine, even strips of wool to be coiled into rolags. Instead, her fiber escaped the cards, or yanked free of the teeth, or decided to cling to her. Had it still been attached to sheep, she would have suspected them of frisking. Worse, the air was close, hot and sticky. Everywhere that wool touched her skin, she itched. She'd thought that Lark couldn't hear her over the clack of the loom, but the moment she sniffed, the woman stopped to work. "What's the matter?" "It won't come right," Sandry replied, trying not to whine. "It's worse than ever, and it clings to everything. Why is it being so bad today?" "Bring it here." The girl obeyed, offering the messy cards to Lark. "Mila preserve us, you look like you've grown a fur coat." "When I tried to pick it off, it just goes somewhere else." Sandry frowned at the ivory-colored tufts on her dress and hands. "It just likes you too much. You have to teach it to mind you." Lark pinched her fingers together and pulled them back. Instantly, the wool on Sandry stood on end, like dogs begging for a treat. An eerie prickling told the girl that the fibers on her cheeks were doing the same thing. "What I expected," the woman said. "Take a deep breath." Eyes closed, Sandry obeyed. Automatically, she breathed as Nico had taught them that morning, counting to herself. Lark said quietly, "Pinch your fingers together over your dress without touching it, then pull them away from you. Pinch with your mind as well." "My mind?" the girl thought, startled. But surely that was the same as imagining herself as a tight thread. She made her mind into grasping fingers and pinched with them, then opened an eye to see what had happened. A third of the wool fibers stood wavering. The rest lay flat on her dress, crawling away from the spot that Lark had called them to. "Really want it, Sandry. There should be nothing you want more just now." Sandry closed her eyes and wanted her mind to work with her fingers to pull the fibers away from her dress. She peeked again. Now all the wool had gone flat. Lark chuckled. "Maybe you should order it, like most nobles order servants." Just thinking of that made the girl smile grimly. She'd definitely seen enough of that kind of noble before. She snapped out her hand as if she were Lisa Van Nadlin banishing Daja from the dining hall. "We need to work on your control," she heard Lark say. Sandry's eyes popped open. The bits of wool that had clung to her so hard had now jumped to Lark and were huddled together on the dedicate's breast. Lark was grinning. "I'm sorry," cried Sandry. "I didn't... Well..." Lark patted her hand. "Don't frighten it. Wool hairs want to come together." She tried to pull the fibers off her clothes without success. They were trying to weave themselves into her habit. "I'll need your help, since you are the one who did this," she told Sandry, "but gently." The girl took up the pattern of breaths until she was calm. There had been something, when she had dismissed the wool, a feeling that was odd and yet familiar. She found it inside and used it to gently call the fibers. Softness tickled her palm. The wool now formed a small pile in her hand. "There you go," Lark said approvingly as thunder rolled outside. "Now, let me show you a charm that will keep it out of your face and off your dress." Nico came for tryst when the storm was just beginning to make itself heard. She was pacing the main room nervously, wanting badly to go outside before the winds swept over the walls. When she saw Nico opening the small gate, she ran out to him. "Put this on," he ordered, tossing her a long, oiled cape like the one he wore. Once it was settled on her shoulders, he gave her a broad-brimmed hat to tie under her chin. The winds gusted through Winding Circle, tearing at curtains and clothes. In the gardens, dedicates and novices hurried to finish their work and get inside as the man and the girl walked briskly to the south gate. Once outside Winding Circle, they picked their way down the cliff path and entered the cave. Small drops were already lashing the air. On the rocks below, the sea boomed, the waves foaming under the whip of the wind. As she pushed back her hat, Triss squinted into the gloom. Lightning flared in long strips out to sea, throwing the world into relief. Curtains of rain parted. People had lit the beacons in the harbor lighthouses. They shone a warning to storm-caught ships and boats to steer away from the rocky islands just off Summersea. Watch the lightning. Concentrate on it. Think about it, Nico yelled over a crash of thunder. What is it? Lightning, I mean, Triss yelled back. Power builds in the sky and ground in a storm. The power in the ground strives to meet that which is in the clouds. When they connect, lightning shows the path the power takes. Never forget, all power must go somewhere once there's enough of it. Thunder growled around them as if in agreement. Thunder is air along the path. It heats so fast that the air booms like a drum. The roar of thunder faded. More quietly, he said, now that you know what lightning is, concentrate. Try to feel where the next bolt will strike. Feel for power building up. What if it decides to come after me? It won't. Magic only attracts lightning when it's meant to. Thank the gods, or those with magical powers wouldn't live to be mages. Where will the next bolt strike? She watched the lightning pick its way across the sea, approaching the harbor islands. I can't tell. It just goes any old where. Try! He almost had to scream to be heard over a thunder blast. It's connected to you. Feel for it. His words rang clearly in the pause between cracks of thunder. Ouch, she grumbled, rubbing the ear he'd been yelling into. Stop ducking the lesson. Triss, there's only so much that I or anyone can teach you. To control the power that makes your life so hard, you must be able to grasp it at any time, in any place. Let nothing stop you from bearing down, understand? Or do you want to kill someone one day and only find out afterward that you didn't mean to? She stared up at him, terrified. Lit by flickers of lightning, his eyes pits of shadow in his craggy face, he looked eerie. It was as if he knew all the dark places in her heart. Lightning blazed. A single broad strip lanced into a tree on the peak of the rock that was Bit Island, and 100 burning fragments flew through the air. Triss's gleeful shout was drowned in a thunder crash that shivered her bones. A good thing it only struck a tree, and that tree alone on a rocky peak, Nico said when they could hear again. Lightning creates hundreds of wildfires every year, burning acres of forest and croplands. It kills people, and animals too. It's a dangerous toy. Keep that in mind. If it's so dangerous, why not push the storms out to sea, or better yet, stop them cold? I mean, I'd miss them, but wouldn't that be easier for most people? Oh no, he said instantly. Easy, perhaps, for the people, but it would mean death or madness for a mage. He waited for a growl of thunder to end before he went on. Nature has her own power. Tempting as it is, mages should never tinker with nature, not in a storm or in an earthquake, or with the tides. She may allow it for a time, but eventually she always loses her temper. The result can be devastating. Trust me, he sighed. Even the greatest mages have their limit, and nature is it. But aboard ship, those knots. The captain said Miss Manders tie the wind in those knots. Isn't that meddling with nature? Nico smiled thinly. Miss Manders, who specialize in wind, spend their lives learning nothing else. Those who survive apprenticeship, anyway? Just 1 in 10 lives to be a journeyman, you know. As masters, they coax the winds into thinking that the curves of knot are open lanes of air before they usually travel. Are you prepared to spend 10 years or more learning to be a simple puff of air? Learning only that and nothing else, and that only if you live? Triss stared out at the white-capped waves. The storm was moving on, the roll of thunder growing more distant. There has to be a quicker way, Triss thought. If I was a mage, I'd get nature to do my bidding. They'd call me Storm Killer, and I would be famous all over the world. Nico tugged her ear gently. Let's try the exercise again. Breathe in. When Daja entered Frostpine's forge, the fire was banked. Only Carell was there, up to his elbows in clay, as he shaped molds. She hesitated. I was looking for Dedicate Frostpine. Just walk around to the other side of this building. He's a goldsmith today. Curious, Daja asked. Shouldn't you be with him? Carell grinned. I'm only his apprentice for iron. He doesn't have an apprentice for his work in gold, though he did mention he thought someone might come by to help him. Daja thanked him and circled the building. Looking through the door on the opposite side, she saw Frostpine. He stood at a counter with his back to her in front of one of 3 upright metal rectangles. A series of holes were punched through each in sizes that ranged from nearly 1/3 of an inch across in the leftmost plate to a pinpoint in the rightmost. Using flat-ended tongs, he gripped a tongue of metal that protruded through the hole in the middle of the central plate. Lifting a foot to brace himself against the counter, he began to pull. Slowly, fraction by fraction, he drew gold wire from the hole. "Dasha, will you do me a favor?" he asked, voice strained. She started. How did he know she was there again? What do you need?" She propped the staff beside the door and went to him. "On the other side of this plate, there's a coil of wire. Straighten it as I pull." She found the coil and picked it up, and it was barely warm gold and coarse to her touch. Obediently, she opened a loop of it until a straight length fed into the metal plate. "What is all this?" she asked. "I'm drawing gold wire." Lowering his foot, Frostpine continued to back up, without faltering. "Precious metals, they're soft compared to iron. By greasing the wire with beeswax, dragging it through smaller and smaller holes, it gets thinner and longer." "It looks hard," she said, as the last of the gold fed through the plate. Frostpine turned his face away. Sorry. My goodness. Frostpine turned his face away as the wire popped free. To Daj's horror, it snapped like a whip. If the man hadn't turned away, the flying end might have lashed his face. Frostpine gathered the new wire and took it to the counter. First, he rubbed cold beeswax over its length, then wound it into a coil. Choosing a smaller hole in the plate, he thrust the wire's pointed end into it. "It looks hard because I'm not putting my whole self into it. If I did..." He closed his eyes and took a long breath. Briefly, he held it, and let it go slowly. Daj's skin prickled. Something even warmer than the summer air gathered in the room, to wind itself around the smith. Each piece of metal in the shop seemed to burn with inner fire. Something in her answered, timidly. The man breathed as Nico had taught the children, then strode to the front of the plate to seize the wire's point with his tongs. This time he didn't brace himself, he only pulled up, backing up. The metal flowed through the plate slowly first, then faster as if half liquid. Frostpine didn't turn away when the end popped out. He lifted his hand. The free end of the wire leaped into it. Physically, it's easier this way. He gathered the new thinner wire. But it burns up my strength. Here. He touched his chest. And here. He patted his head. I'd hate to get a nasty surprise and have nothing to fight it with. Examining the metal, he frowned. This needs to fire again. He crossed the room, entering a small cubicle. Heat rippled through the open door inside. Inside was a small forge. The only light came from its fire. He placed the gold coil in the coals with tongs. Another thick length of wire was already there. This he lifted out. See that red color? Your gold is just hot enough to be worked. Carrying the wire out of the cubicle, he put it on an anvil and turned it several times as if he turned sausages in a frying pan. The anvil draws the heat out. Any questions? She blinked. No, sir. Then here. He rubbed beeswax on a new wire, then fed one narrow end through a hole in one of the plates. The flat metal pieces are properly called draw plates, since this way of making wire is called drawing. Taking Daj's arm, he placed his tongs in her hand and folded her fingers around them. These are draw tongs. They flattened ends make it easier to grip the metal. Draw the wire. She stared at the tool. How? Take a deep breath. She did it as he raised his hand before her face. Clear your mind. Let your breath out. Now grab that end with your tongs, shut your eyes, and call the metal to you. When it feels right, mind that it must feel right, not look right. Start pulling. Don't stop. If you do, that makes a weak spot in the wire. Keep going till it's all the way through. I call it? Frostpine grinned, white teeth flashing. Come, traitor girl. You know gold, surely. You've held it, seen it in different forms. Think of gold in your innermost heart and call it to you. Don't forget to pull on the wire as you call. Thunder boomed outside. Nervous, she walked to the front of the plate and gripped the wire's end in her pincers. Call metal to her? It was metal, not a living thing. Once, when she was small, she had crept into a goldsmith's shop. It was dark inside. Only the smith was visible, her body outlined in forged fire. With tongs, she had lifted a bottle from the coals. Turning until she had held the bottle over a mold, she had tilted it. Living fire poured out in a yellow-white stream that sparkled and glittered as it fell. Daja's eyes closed, called the memory of that flow, her arms straining. The metal fought her at first. She called it again in her heart. Slowly, a little at a time, that remembered gold turned away from the mold in her mind's eye and reached out to her. Catching her foot, she opened her eyes. She stood a yard from the draw plate. Her tongs gripped a wire 3 times longer than the piece that she'd started with. With a gasp, she dropped tongs and wire to the ground. "I'm sorry, I muffed it. I didn't take it through all the way. I've weakened your gold," she said. Even her arms and knees felt weak and loose, trembling after so much effort. Had it taken an effort? Thunder boomed almost overhead. She sat on the floor hard. "Don't worry. That was just an experiment. Drink this." He put a stone cup filled with liquid under her nose. "It'll put you to rights." It tasted like water with mint leaves crushed into it. She drank it all and found that she could get to her feet. "You have a talent for this," Frostpine told her, "and any fool can see you love metalwork. Would you like to learn smithcraft? Come here, say in the afternoon after the rest period. I'd like to have the teaching of you." "Can I?" she whispered. "No one will beat me or lock me in my room or make me do extra chores for being with Luksha? You'll let me learn?" "It's more than just my letting you, Daja," Frostpine said, tweaking one of her braids. "I waited for years for someone who loves it as I do to come along." Trembling, she stared up into his face. "If I hadn't?" The words caught in her throat. She tried again. "If our ship hadn't sunk, if I wasn't Trangshi now." "Daja." She shook her head. "I would have gone all my life thinking I was wrong, thinking I was dirty to want to do Luksha things, being a bad trader, being a bad Kisubo." The man shook his head. Outside, the rain whipped the air. "Don't blame your people. They lived hard lives. Their beliefs help your people to stay together, to defend themselves against lords and merchant guilds." "I know that," she admitted, "but how many trader kids are like me, wanting to learn Luksha work?" "Kids?" he asked with a smile. "Something a boy I live with says. Well, kid," he winked, drawing a smile from Daja. "After we get Will into things like charcoal, coal, different hammers and different tongs, you may think the traders have the right of it after all." He put his hands on his hips and looked over her. "We start by finding you a proper apron, and you might consider wearing clothes you don't mind soiling. You're going to get very dirty at this." A moment ago, she would have been glad to reject anything trader, like her scarlet mourning. Now she blinked with dismay. He was right. She knew he was, but she smoothed her hand over his sleeve. She would ask Lark. Lark would know what to do. Frostpine resettled his belt. "Corell's aprons and mine are too big. We're off to the Tanners." Putting an arm around her shoulders, he steered her out into the rain. Watching Briar and Trist bicker as they washed the supper dishes, Daja remembered Frostpine's instructions. It still bothered her to think of putting off her mourning clothes, but she knew the smith was right. Scarlet clothes were too expensive. "Lark," she asked, hesitant, There's a smith who'd like me for an assistant." Lark had been about to rise from the table. She settled back into her chair instead. "Does he have a name?" "Frostpine?" Lark and Rosethorn shared a look. An odd look, thought Sandry, who watched them with interest. "Nico was right," murmured Rosethorn. "We know Frostpine," Lark told Daja. "He's a good man and a fine smith. You'll learn a lot from him. He wants to see you in the afternoons?" Daja nodded. Do you know where I could find, other clothes?" She smoothed a hand over her scarlet tunic. "Nothing fancy, just leggings, maybe, and some shirts." Lark nodded. "That's sensible. It's no use getting your mourning all burned and streaked in the forge. I don't have leggings, but will breeches do?" Daja nodded, looking at the table in front of her. A warm brown hand rested on her shoulder. I can make you a scarlet headband and a scarlet armband so you'll have some colors to wear for your family, Lark told her, so people will know of your loss. For a moment, Daja couldn't speak past a lump in her throat. Lark had seen her heart. She knew what it cost to put aside the scarlet and had offered a practical way not to. Now the Kusubo spirits would not be angry and take revenge, or think that she hadn't loved them. Thank you, she whispered. That is kind. Then let's take care of it right now. Lark took Daja upstairs where general stores for the cottage filled boxes in the space between the girls' rooms. These should fit you, she told Daja as she opened a crate. Sorting through folded clothes, she picked out several pairs of breeches, 3 in different shades of brown, 1 in leaf green, 1 in dark blue, and placed them in the girls' outstretched arms. With the weather turning hot, these should be suitable, Lark said, adding light, sturdy tunics in green, orange, light brown, and blue to Daja's stack. Why don't you try them all on? Those that don't fit, bring to me. I'll have the headband and armband for you by tomorrow. Thank you, Daja whispered, clutching an armful of clothes that smelled of cedar chips and sun-drying. It's hard to break traditional ways, Lark said kindly. If it helps, the people of Caravan Corlita wore headbands and armbands one year when they followed the spice trails in Aliput. Their all scarlet clothes means disease in the house. Daja frowned. Hadn't she heard about that somewhere? I saw it with my own eyes, Lark said in trader talk, framing her eyes with 2 fingers. Among Daja's people, that sign was as holy as a vow to Koma and Oti. I rode with them when it happened. They'd lost the caravan master and 3 of the guards in a rock slide. You lived with traders? Daja blushed. She hadn't meant to sound shocked. I wasn't always a housebird. Lark's eyes twinkled. I belonged to a company of acrobats. We traveled to Yanjing to work and to learn their acrobats' tricks. Gently, she pinched Daja's upper arm and lower lips with her fingers to get the girl to close her mouth. Have I shocked you with my disreputable past? Daja gasped. Oh, Lark, no, I was just... Looking at the woman's dancing eyes, Daja realized Lark had been joking. Your family won't hate you if you relax a bit, you know, the woman told her softly. I think they'd want you to really live your life, Trangshi or no. Daja turned to take the clothes into her room, thinking about what Lark had said. A flicker of green, a cartwheel, caught her eye. She looked back to see Lark turn a second cartwheel before she went down the stairs. The woman looked back and up at her. And I'm not completely a housebird yet, she said and winked. Smiling, Daja went into her room to try on her new things.